welcome to the deep dive.
Oh, it's good to be here.
This time we're really diving deep into execution, the discipline of getting things done.
Oh, yeah, I know this one. Classic.
By Larry Bossidy.
From Charan.
And Charles Burck. It's all about, well, how to actually make things happen.
Execution, right.
Right. We've got some excerpts here. Some seriously good stuff.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So, first things first, why do so many smart people, leaders, even fail to execute? You've got a great plan, you've got the smarts,
Right.
but then nothing.
Well, the book really hits on that gap, between a brilliant strategy and actually getting results.
They call it the execution gap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it all starts, they say, with the leader.
Oh, interesting. So it's not a system problem or a resources problem. It's...
Well, those can be factors, sure.
Right.
But ultimately it comes down to leadership.
They start with this story about a CEO, Joe.
Oh, Joe, yeah.
Seems like he has it all. Great strategy, successful acquisitions.
Wall Street loves him. But then, boom, he's fired. What happened?
Right. It's a head scratcher.
That's the point. Joe had goals, ambitious goals even, but he didn't know how to, operationalize them, No culture of accountability, no system for tracking progress.
So it's not just about the what, it's about the how.
Exactly. That's the execution piece.
The book says this gap, this execution gap, is the biggest problem facing companies today.
Absolutely. Companies that should be thriving, they have the potential.
Right. They've got everything.
The talent, the resources.
The ideas.
But they can't execute.
So what's the antidote? The book talks about Dell Computer.
Oh, Dell. A classic example.
They were doing something right back then. What was their secret?
Meticulous execution.
Okay.
Their build-to-order system. Think about it.
Okay.
Close coordination with suppliers, laser focus on efficiency.
Got it.
And bam, high inventory turnover.
Now, I know inventory turnover might sound a little, well, yeah, maybe. But here's why it matters. It all ties into this thing called asset velocity.
Ah, yes. How quickly a company uses its assets to make money. Sales, specifically.
Right. Higher velocity means...
more sales.
More bang for your buck,
Yep.
better cash flow, maybe even higher profit.
Exactly, and that's what set Dell apart. Competitors tried to match their prices.
Undercut them, even.
Yeah, but they couldn't touch Dell's efficiency. Their execution was the weapon.
So, we know execution is critical. But how do we actually do it? The book lays out 3 building blocks.
Okay, the framework.
And the first one, the leader's behavior. 7 specific behaviors.
They get really specific, which is great. It's not just this vague, be a good leader stuff.
Right. Like, one story that stood out to me was about this CEO goes out into the field, finds this amazing manager just killing it in some remote location.
It's about being connected, right, to all levels of the organization.
Jesus. Not just stuck in the head office. I also love that story about the CEO after a really tough debate with a colleague.
Yeah, that's a good one.
He sends this note thanking them for being candid. It's about creating a culture where honest dialogue is valued.
Safe to disagree, to challenge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not afraid to speak your mind. And then there's Jack Welch, the GE guy.
Oh, legendary.
Learns about the power of inventory turns from a competitor.
Humility. Willingness to learn.
Right. So it's not just about being brilliant or charismatic. It's
about the right behaviors, the right mindset.
But individual behavior, that's just the start, right? What's the next piece?
The culture. Building a culture of execution throughout the organization.
Not just feel-good slogans.
Nope. Tangible, measurable outcomes.
They have this story about a team trying to figure out what cultural change actually meant.
Vague, right.
Totally. Until someone asks, from what to what?
Get specific.
Exactly. What behaviors do we want? What results? It's about having a target.
And then incentivizing those behaviors. Rewards tied to performance, not just, being liked.
One of the authors, Charan, calls some leaders wimps when it comes to giving honest feedback.
Oof. Tough love.
He's got a point, though. A culture of execution means addressing performance issues head on.
Accountability.
Absolutely. So we've got strong leadership behaviors. We've got the right culture.
What's missing?
The people.
Ah, yes. The right people in the right jobs.
And that takes courage.
To make those tough decisions about talent.
They tell this story about a CEO invests $250 million in a plant in Indonesia.
Big project.
Huge. But it fails. Why? The manager they chose wasn't the right fit.
Skills mismatch. Ow.
Expensive lesson. And it's not just technical skills either. They talk about Walt, this super charismatic executive. Loved by everyone.
Okay.
but terrible at operations.
Charisma doesn't equal competence.
Sometimes you have to make that tough call. Move people, develop them further, or even let them go.
Tough, but necessary.
And Larry Bossidy, one of the authors,
Yeah, he's very hands-on.
he describes his approach to interviewing, digs deep, checks references, goes beyond those first impressions.
Committed to getting the right people on the bus.
So we've got these building blocks: the leader, the culture, the people.
The foundation.
But how do they all work together? The book introduces 3 core processes:
Okay, I'm listening.
people, strategy, and operations.
And they all have to be connected.
They use the example of AT&T, went on this huge acquisition spree.
Trying to enter new markets.
Exactly. But they stumbled. They hadn't figured out the how of integrating those acquisitions.
The operational details.
Right. Costly mistake, stock price takes a hit. So it's not enough to just have a vision.
You need a plan, an actionable plan.
And that's where operations comes in, this detailed operating plan. Break down the strategy into specific actions. Who does what, by when, how do we measure progress?
Get granular.
They even recommend focusing on the roughly 20 lines in a budget that drive 80% of the results.
The Pareto principle in action.
But key activities, the ones that really matter.
And don't forget contingency plans. Companies that execute well, they anticipate problems.
Like Honeywell and GE during the Asian financial crisis back in '97. They adapted quickly.
Because they had planned for different scenarios.
So we've covered a lot, this execution gap, these building blocks, the importance of linking people, strategy, and operations.
Mm-hmm.
So what stands out to you from all this as the most important thing about execution?
It's a discipline. It's not a one-time event, It's constant, it's ongoing. It requires attention, feedback, and the ability to adapt.
And it starts with the leader.
Absolutely. They set the tone, the culture, the whole execution environment.
So to wrap up this part of our deep dives, here's something to think about. Of those 3 building blocks, leadership, culture, people,
Okay.
which one is the weakest link in your organization? And what's one thing, just one specific action you can take this week to start strengthening it?
That's a great question. Something to really ponder. And we'll be back in part 2 to dive even deeper, so stay tuned.
Definitely will.
Looking forward to it.
Me too.
All right.
Welcome back. We're digging deeper into execution, the discipline of getting things done. Last time we talked about leadership, culture, people.
That foundation.
Exactly. And now we're zooming in on the people process.
This is where it gets real. Larry Bossidy, one of the authors, he calls it the most important of the 3 core processes.
Interesting. Why do you think that is?
Because it's all about having the right people to actually make those strategies happen, to get things done.
Makes sense. It's not just about brilliant ideas. It's about a team that can execute.
Right. The book goes way beyond those typical performance reviews.
Yeah.
They talk about talent reviews, succession planning.
The real nitty-gritty.
And those tough conversations about performance, about who's the right fit, who needs development.
Right. They talk about specific techniques. Companies like GE, Honeywell, Baxter International.
They're the ones doing it right.
One that caught my eye was retention risk analysis.
Oh, I love that one.
Like a crystal ball for your talent, right? You can see who might be thinking of leaving.
Before it's too late.
And then you can do something about it. Keep those key people engaged.
Proactive talent management. Smart.
And it's not just about keeping people happy in any old job. It's about making sure they're in the right roles.
Where they can really excel.
Baxter International uses these 3 categories: good fit, stretch, and action required.
Oh, yeah. That's a great framework. It tells you who needs support, who's ready for a challenge.
And who might need a different role. Or even,
your decision.
Speaking of, remember Walt, the charismatic executive?
Well, yeah, everyone loved him.
But he was terrible at operations.
Just the wrong fit. And sometimes, even when it's hard, you have to make that call.
Tough decisions.
Yeah.
And those honest conversations, they describe how Jack Welch...
Oh, Jack Welch!
He turned GE's talent review process into this...
Totally honest.
...forum for feedback. Session C meetings, they call them.
No sugarcoating, strengths, weaknesses, everything on the table.
The CEO was actively involved, too. Showed how seriously they took it.
That's leadership. Setting the example.
And then there's Duke Energy. They created this global database with profiles for every executive.
I've heard about this, like baseball cards for executives.
A data-driven approach to managing talent. Promotions, development, succession planning.
All based on this clear picture of each person, their skills, their potential.
But even with all the systems in place, It comes back to those honest conversations.
The human element.
They talk about Larry Bossidy's hiring process. He'd personally call other CEOs to check references.
Wow, he really did his homework.
Shows how committed he was to getting the right people on the bus.
It's not just about hiring, though, right? It's about ongoing assessment, development.
Bossidy would regularly review evaluations, looking for high-potential individuals. And those who weren't performing.
He followed up, too, made sure action was taken. Accountability.
That's what sets companies like GE and Honeywell apart. They invest in their people.
And that allows them to execute, to get results.
So we've talked about the people process. But there are two other core processes, right? Strategy and operations.
The other two legs of the stool. Can't have one without the others.
Right. Shall we move on to strategy?
Let's do it. I was fascinated by how companies create those strategies that are both ambitious and, actually doable. What does the book say?
One thing that really hit me was this idea of asking how, not just what.
Okay, I like that. Explain.
It's not enough to have a goal. You got to know how you're going to get there. The resources, the potential obstacles.
It's the practical stuff.
They use the example of A.T. Cross, the pen company. They use market segment mapping.
To understand their customers, right.
Yeah. Instead of just saying sell more pens, they figure out who they're selling to and why those customers would choose a Cross pen.
Makes sense. Target your efforts.
They identified 3 segments. People buying for themselves, people buying gifts, and corporations buying for, institutional gifts.
Interesting. Different motivations for each.
And that allows them to tailor their marketing and sales. Much more effective.
Customization.
The book also talks about challenging assumptions, especially about the competition.
Oh, yeah, that's important.
There's this story about a CEO raises prices, and guess what?
Profits go up.
Hits his earnings target. He was underestimating his position in the market.
Leaving money on the table.
And there's that software company, hesitant to enter a new market.
Yeah.
They thought the competition was too tough.
Self-limiting beliefs.
But they dug deeper and realized they had a unique advantage.
Sometimes the biggest obstacle is ourselves, right?
Totally. And the book also talks about balance, short-term goals versus long-term goals.
Can't just chase those quarterly numbers.
They tell this story about a CEO reluctant to invest in a new product line.
Because it would hurt short-term earnings.
Exactly. But he was challenged to find other solutions. And he did. Not only address the immediate concern, but strengthen their long-term position.
Strategic thinking.
And then there's this idea of a one-page strategy summary.
Love that. Simple, clear.
No jargon, no complexity, just the essentials.
So everyone's on the same page.
They talk about how Larry Bossidy at Honeywell would call each unit head personally to discuss the plan.
Ensuring alignment.
Buy-in from the beginning.
They even give tips on how to run a strategy review meeting. Challenging assumptions, thinking through roadblocks.
It's a process, not just a presentation.
They use this example of an auto parts supplier, killing it in their main market.
But then they try to expand.
And struggle. Their strategy review revealed they didn't have the right people to support this new direction.
Back to the people process again.
Full circle. So, you can have a great strategy, but
you can't execute it.
It's meaningless.
Oh?
And that brings us to operations. The third core process.
Where the rubber meets the road.
It's all about taking that strategy.
And making it happen.
They have this framework for the operations process, this detailed operating plan. Breaks down the strategy into manageable actions, clear accountability.
Measurable goals.
And they recommend, again, focusing on those key lines in the budget, the ones that really drive results.
80-20 rule.
They also talk about how to run effective operations review meetings. It's not just about presenting numbers.
It's about understanding what those numbers mean.
There's this manager who wants to cut prices. The leader challenges him, asks about manufacturing costs, overtime, the impact on other departments.
Thinking through the consequences.
They also emphasize being proactive, having contingency plans, conducting regular reviews.
To stay on track.
There's that example of Honeywell after 9/11. They navigated that crisis so well.
They had contingency plans. They were prepared.
So it's about being prepared for the unexpected, but also about regularly reviewing progress, making adjustments.
Course correction.
They describe how Larry Bossidy would conduct these quarterly reviews, really digging into the numbers.
And understanding what was driving them.
He'd write detailed memos afterward, summarizing the key points, outlining actions to take.
And then he'd follow up, make sure those actions were happening.
That follow-through is key. Shows that execution is a priority.
Not just lip service.
And then there's synchronization, making sure all the different parts of the organization are working together.
Like a well-oiled machine.
They used the example of General Motors and their employee discount program back in 2005.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
It was a huge success. They coordinated everything: advertising, production, inventory.
Seamless execution.
And it all circles back to leadership.
Creating the environment where that kind of execution can happen.
So as we wrap up this part of the deep dive, what's one key insight about operations that our listeners should really remember?
I think it's this. The operations process is where the rubber meets the road. This is where that beautiful strategy becomes reality. It's the doing part of execution.
And it requires that same discipline, that same attention to detail that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. A great strategy is worthless if you can't execute it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We'll be back in part 3 to wrap up this deep dive into execution with some final thoughts and key takeaways. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring execution, the discipline of getting things done. And wow, so much to unpack, right?
It's a dense book. So
Yep.
many great examples, so many practical takeaways.
We talked about those 3 building blocks, remember? Strong leadership, a culture of execution, and the right people in the right jobs.
The foundation.
And then those 3 core processes: people, strategy, and operations. We saw how companies like GE, Honeywell, Dell, even Baxter International use these principles to achieve some pretty amazing results.
It's proof that execution isn't just about working hard. It's about working smart, being disciplined, and making those tough decisions.
And at the end of the day, it all comes back to the leader, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They set the tone, they create the environment where execution can thrive.
The authors are very clear at that. Execution isn't just a toolbox. It's not a one-time fix. It's a leadership discipline. It's about embodying those principles, living them every day.
There's this story in the book
Yeah.
about a CEO who had to make a tough call about an employee, Rob.
Oh, yeah, I remember Rob.
Great as a manufacturing manager.
But just not cutting it as a plant manager.
And instead of just firing him, the CEO found a different role for Rob. Somewhere his strengths could really shine.
I like that. It shows that leaders who execute well, they're not just thinking about the bottom line. They're thinking about their people.
Developing them, helping them find the right fit.
Exactly.
And sometimes that means making that really tough call, letting someone go, even when it's hard. Larry Bossidy talks about how he handled those situations.
He had empathy.
Recognizing that everyone deserves respect.
Even when things aren't working out.
It's a balance, right? Doing what's best for the organization, but also recognizing the human impact.
It's never easy. But that's what leadership is all about.
And execution, this book, really drives home the point that you can't just talk about execution. You have to live it every day.
Walks the walk.
And it's not a one-time thing. It's not like you fix it and you're done.
It's a journey, an ongoing process, always striving to improve.
Close that gap between what we want to achieve
and what we actually achieve.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into execution, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge. The authors pose this question. Think about those 3 core processes: people, strategy, operations.
Okay.
Which one needs the most attention in your organization? And what's one specific action, just one, that you can take this week to start strengthening it?
A great question to ponder. And remember, execution, it's a journey. It's about constant learning, constant improvement.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into execution, the discipline of getting things done. We hope you found it valuable. And more importantly, that you're inspired to take action. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep executing.